Welcome to the explainer. Okay, let's dive into this. Picture this incredible scenario. You meet a guy and wow, there's this rare, incredibly deep connection right off the bat. You find yourselves talking for hours. He's totally engaged, remembering these tiny, super specific details about your life that you literally barely even mentioned. You're laughing together, your guard comes completely down, and for the first time in what feels like forever, you feel truly, genuinely seen in a way that is exceptionally rare. It feels amazing, right? You're probably thinking to yourself, finally, this is it. But then, something completely unexpected happens.
Bam. The replies suddenly slow down. That amazing warmth you were just basking in totally changes. A vast, undeniable distance appears almost overnight. And here is the crazy paradox that leaves so many people just incredibly confused and hurt. This massive shift, it doesn't happen after some huge blowout conflict. There was no betrayal, no fight, no rejection. It actually happens exactly because things were getting undeniably real.
If you've ever experienced this jarring 180 from someone, it can leave you asking an absolutely brutal question. If he cared, why did he just disappear? Look, it's a deeply painful experience, and if you are asking this right now, your confusion is 100% valid. But the psychological mystery behind this exact behavior, it's actually fascinating. Because emotionally avoidant men are rarely as simple as people think they are.
Which brings us to section 1, the twist. Myth versus reality.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how completely it dismantles the societal assumptions we all carry around about emotionally avoidant men. Society instantly assumes that a guy who fears attachment is just a player, right? That he's inherently cold or just a classic commitment phobe. And hey, sometimes that's absolutely true. But psychology reveals a much deeper, kind of wild reality. For these men, emotional attachment doesn't feel exciting. It literally feels dangerous. It's not a logical choice they're making. Somewhere deep down in their nervous system, the very act of closeness is actually triggering biological fear instead of safety. So where does this wiring come from? Let's look at section 2, the childhood blueprint. To figure out exactly how a nervous system gets wired to literally fear love, we've got to travel back in time. Decades of research from attachment theory show us that how a person experiences love early in life heavily shapes how safe emotional closeness feels later on. Think about the really damaging lessons young boys are constantly taught, both implicitly and explicitly. Being emotional makes you weak. Needing people is dangerous. Handle it yourself. Don't cry. Don't depend on anyone. Kids are brilliant, right? They adapt incredibly fast, especially boys who are just trying to fit into societal norms. A young boy figures out real quick which emotions earn him a comforting hug and which emotions earn him rejection or mockery. And because of those harsh childhood lessons, they develop deep emotional self-protection. It's a childhood adaptation. The young boy simply stops expressing fear. He stops showing sadness or asking for reassurance. And what starts out as a basic survival mechanism, just swallowing tears so he doesn't get picked on, eventually, over decades, hardens into his permanent adult identity. And that leads directly into section 3, the performance of strength. Because of this hardened identity, there is a massive, stark contrast between how these men appear on the outside and the hidden reality of what's happening on the inside. Externally, a lot of emotionally avoidant men are highly functional. They look super composed, fiercely independent, completely put together. But internally, their inner monologue sounds more like, I just need space. Something feels off. I don't know why, but I suddenly feel trapped. They deeply want connection, but emotional intimacy flips a switch in their nervous system, triggering a fear of losing control. And the wildest part is that this panic hits even when absolutely nothing bad has happened in the relationship. Intimacy itself is the trigger. So let's explore section 4, why closeness triggers distance. The profound truth here is this. Closeness quietly removes emotional armor. Think about it. Emotional intimacy naturally creates exposure. The closer someone gets to you, the more they have the power to hurt you, reject you, or see those highly vulnerable parts of yourself that you've spent your entire life hiding. For these men, losing that protective armor feels absolutely terrifying. So the nervous system jumps in and does what it believes will keep him safe. It creates distance. Not because he feels nothing, but actually because he suddenly feels way too much. This brings us to a heavy reality in section 5, the numbness of survival. We really need to look at the day-to-day reality of carrying around all these suppressed emotions, especially how it ties into the modern male loneliness crisis.
Lots of men grow up without any emotionally safe spaces or even a vocabulary for their internal feelings. So, what do they do instead of processing emotion? They rely heavily on distractions: work, hitting the gym, gaming, endless doom scrolling, ambition, using humor as a shield, even retreating into pure silence. They will literally do anything except sit still long enough to actually feel what's happening underneath. And tragically, society actively rewards this emotional suppression. We praise it as dedication and strength, right up until the man becomes completely emotionally isolated.
And this brilliantly illustrates the long-term cost of that suppression. After years of shutting down, they literally stop recognizing their own emotions. When they actually experience sadness or fear or vulnerability, their brain mistranslates it. They feel it instead as irritation or numbness or just pure heavy exhaustion. They weren't taught how to sit with these vulnerable feelings safely, so the feelings get entirely scrambled in their own minds. They don't even realize how disconnected they are until someone genuinely tries to love them. Which brings us to the profound fear beneath all this behavior. What happens when leaving first feels safer than being left? Because underneath the emotional avoidance is usually something incredibly human, an intense, paralyzing fear of abandonment, rejection, and inadequacy. To them, distance just feels safer than disappointment. Control feels safer than vulnerability. So they preemptively protect themselves by detaching. They pull the plug, even when the relationship itself was never actually a threat.
So how does this play out? Let's move to section 6, the self-sabotage cycle. Let's move to the breakdown and see how this builds into a totally predictable but really tragic domino effect that actively destroys a loving relationship in real time. First, an emotionally available partner moves closer, offering genuine love and intimacy. Second, because that emotional armor is slipping, panic rapidly rises internally. And finally, step 3, he unconsciously pulls away. It's a cycle. The more love appears, the more distant he becomes. He turns hot and cold, present then distant, and eventually the partner is left feeling completely abandoned. But remember, it wasn't because affection never existed. It's because fear continuously interrupted the connection every single time it deepened. Finally, let's talk about section 7, the path to healing. I know this all sounds really heavy, but attachment patterns are absolutely not permanent life sentences. They are simply learned survival strategies, and what is learned can be unlearned. However, making that change requires real, radical honesty, not the performance of strength, not deflection, not using a quick joke as a shield to change the subject. It requires dropping the act completely and choosing to be truly, uncomfortably vulnerable. It requires being able to look a partner in the eye and say something like, "I think closeness scares me. I don't know how to stay emotionally open. I learned to survive by shutting down." Saying those words out loud can feel completely terrifying, especially for someone who was never given an emotional language growing up. It exposes all their blind spots. But that terrifying honesty is exactly where the healing process truly begins. As we wrap up, we really have to remember this vital takeaway. Distance isn't always cruelty. Sometimes it is simply fear wearing the mask of independence. Now, let me be super clear here. Understanding this psychology absolutely does not excuse harmful behavior. And it doesn't mean anyone should sit around and tolerate emotional neglect forever. No way. But it does drastically reframe the behavior. It changes the picture from someone acting with toxic, intentional malice to seeing a deeply wounded person who's simply trying to survive using broken emotional tools they built during childhood. So the crucial point is this ultimate irony. Avoiding attachment might protect you from pain temporarily, sure, but it also absolutely blocks you from the closeness you were hoping to find. There are men walking around every single day who desperately want love, while simultaneously fearing what love requires from them emotionally. It is an exhausting internal conflict, but human beings are fundamentally wired for connection. So ask yourself, is the protective wall you built to survive your past now the very thing preventing the future you actually want? Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer. Keep exploring the fascinating depths of human behavior, and I'll see you next time.